This week on the show, we have my friend and returning guest, Troy Valencia. If you're not already familiar with Troy, he is co-founder of retreat company Root and Wisdom, an Iboga provider, and co-founder of nonprofit Sacred Roots Foundation, a 501c3 dedicated to reconnecting with and preserving ancestral traditions in Gabon. With a background in chemistry and East-West psychology, Troy is now completing his final dissertation for a clinical psychology degree. His mission in life is very clear: to relieve suffering. Through his work with the sacred root, Iboga, he is found it to be a powerful ally in that mission. He is a wealth of knowledge on Iboga, and in this episode, he paints a very vivid picture on Iboga's effects on the body, mind, psyche, and spirit. Highlights from this episode: how to ensure reciprocity with Iboga and the indigenous keepers of this plant in Gabon, Africa. The difference between Iboga and Ibogaine. Why someone might choose to work with Iboga. How Iboga works on the mind. And he answers the question, can someone become addicted to Iboga? If you would like to learn more about working with Troy, donate to Sacred Roots Foundation, or connect and learn more just about all of his work in general, check out the show notes. You will find everything you need there. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome to the School of Whispers podcast. This is your host, Stephanie. I'm a licensed acupuncture physician and herbalist with a background in psychology, health sciences, and exercise physiology. Within my own spiritual awakening, I found myself learning pivotal lessons when I got myself to be in silence. Within that silence, the whispers came through. This is my sacred space of vulnerable storytelling where my guests and I share about the magic that comes from a life of following these whispers. I'm grateful you made it here, and I hope this show inspires you to live a life of following your own whispers. Let's get into the show. Troy, welcome back to the show. You are my third time guest, which is an all-time record. You are my first, maybe only guest for this season 5 of the show. And to anyone who's new to the show, new to Troy, check out the show notes. You'll find a lot of information about him, previous episodes. But what we're going to get into today is Iboga. And just to give a lay of the land, in our previous episodes, Troy and I have been recording through Zoom in different time zones, different countries, and now we are in the same exact place, same country, and it feels really special. It feels like a full circle moment, and it really, a lot of it is thanks to Iboga. So in my life, you are the authority on Iboga. And the world is changing a lot when it comes to Iboga and Ibogaine and all that good stuff. And I feel like there's a lot of confusion. So I'm really grateful to have you here on the show to shed some light on the whole big, wonderful topic that is Iboga. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself and share some of your background, your credentials. And yeah, I would love for you to get into the history of Iboga as well, so people can understand what your relationship to the plant is here.
Yeah, thank you, Steph. It's always lovely chatting with you. And as I've said many times, thank you for deciding to move down to the jungle and do this work we're doing out here. It's really special work. And to have people like yourself come join us is absolutely beautiful to see. So thank you for that. My background, a little bit, I'll share. Before I say anything else, anytime we talk about Iboga, I think the most important thing is we always ground back with the indigenous people. So I just want to put this out there that, there's a lot of conversations right now about Ibogaine and all that. I think the one thing that just needs to stay central is reciprocity. And so for anyone who's interested, we have a nonprofit of 501c3, Sacred Roots Foundation, and we use that to help support the indigenous tribes over there back in Gabon, the Bwiti tribes. So I just want to honor them as a true authority. And just maybe if I can speak on this podcast as someone who's spent a lot of time helping Westerners find an approach to Iboga that's maybe more designed or tailored for them. And I could say maybe I'm authority in that arena, but in terms of authority on Iboga, that's definitely reserved for the people back in Gabon. Yeah. And so, yeah, a little bit my background: chemistry undergrad degree, biology undergrad degree, master's in chemistry. And then I got a second master's in East-West psychology from the California Institute of Integral Studies. It's an amazing program. If anyone's ever looking to go back to school for something really exciting, do that program. And then I entered a clinical psychology doctorate program, which I'm in the dissertation phase right now of all of that. Fun times. And I've been working with Iboga for about 7 years now. And for me personally, it was never something I felt called to do. It was never one of those things. My introduction came to Iboga, actually, I left an ayahuasca retreat and just had a profound experience. And I received a message from a woman who was at the retreat, but I didn't get a chance to connect with, who had gone to sit with Iboga after the retreat we were on together. And in her vision, she saw me multiple times. And for her, this meant something. And so she found my number, who knows how, and sent me a message and said, "Hey, Troy, this is so-and-so. I just want you to know I worked with Iboga recently, and in my ceremony, you came up several times. I just felt like you should know." Me, just having woke up spiritually, understood this was something to explore further. So I went out, sat with Iboga, and one of the very first things that happened was I found myself walking through a jungle. And I found myself moving out of this jungle onto a village with a bunch of African people running around with chickens. There was a whole thing happening. And very long story short, I went back home, took a genetics test, and found out that my father, who I had never met, is of Gabonese lineage. And there was some other little events that happened, but the long story short is I quit my job, sold my condo in San Diego, and walked away from everything I had in my life, even a loving partnership, and moved out here. And I've been working with this plant ever since, trying to make sure that it's held with reciprocity and that it's done in a way that really is applicable for the Western individual, and while also, serving to bring more information to the space by means of my chemistry background, which really helps me articulate the work I've been called to do in this life.
So there's a few directions that I feel myself being pulled in and wanting to talk about Iboga. I definitely want to touch more on the quote unquote call to serve, because I think a lot of people are saying that lately, at least, what it sounds like it's saying as it's becoming possibly legalized in the States and all that good stuff. So we'll get there in referring to, just speaking directly to the Westerner who quote unquote feels called to serve. But before we do that, let's stick with the roots. Let's stick with the Bwiti and the people of Gabon. So if you can please share a little bit more about the origins of Iboga from a spiritual context. Maybe we can touch a little bit on the Bwiti, but I really want to keep this, directly on Iboga. And also after that point, we will, just for the curious listener, we will talk a little bit more about this plant from a alkaloid physiological point of view. But I think it's really important to talk about the roots, the lineage, and also to address what could possibly happen to the sacred keepers of this plant as Iboga becomes possibly legalized in especially the States in the Western world.
Yeah, so I think the first designation there is that, Iboga being legalized in the West is really what we're saying is the Ibogaine movement that's happening with Americans for Ibogaine. And, as you know right now, the majority of these centers that are working with Ibogaine exist in Mexico. These are treatment centers, they're medical centers, right? They're treating people with severe PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and typically people who are looking to break some sort of substance addiction. Yeah, and so the legalization is really focused around Ibogaine. Iboga is its own sort of thing, it's its own sort of class. And going back to where you'd asked to start, this is where the Bwiti kind of come into play. This is the tradition that was asked to be the trusted caretakers of Iboga. and is still doing that in a lot of ways. And what's getting lost with this push with the Ibogaine and everything happening is the reciprocity going back to Gabon. You know, are we really honoring the source of where this comes from? And, you know, Ibogaine might have been found in the Tabernacle Iboga plant, but it doesn't belong to it. Ibogaine is found in many different plants in nature. For example, most of the Ibogaine clinics don't even get their Ibogaine from Iboga. They get it from a plant called Vocanga africana. Yeah, and so the reason for that is because in the Iboga shrub, there's only about 3% Ibogaine at most. In the Vocanga africana plant, there's about 14%. And so you get a much higher extraction efficiency, basically more for your research, for your extraction, yeah? And for them, it's about profits. And so Ibogaine doesn't even need to actually be harvested from a plant anymore. They're actually making it from synthetic means. One of those means is they're making genetically modified yeast strains. So in a normal brewing process, fermentation process, you have these sugars, combine it with the yeast consumes the sugars, and its byproduct is ethanol or alcohol, which then you distill to make whatever. Think of the same process, except now that yeast strain is genetically modified so that it spits out, instead of alcohol, a precursor molecule, which they then convert into Ibogaine. Yeah? They can also do this from a compound called pyridine, for example. My point being is Ibogaine and Iboga are getting further and further apart as the Western world sort of gets their hands on it. And so what we work with specifically, as you know, is we work with Iboga, the tree bark in its purest form, ground up, given directly to you, all harvested through ethical means.
And I realize we haven't really even been that specific on what is the difference between Ibogaine and Iboga. And you touched on that right now, but yeah, I recently had a loved one express concern about Iboga, but they were looking at a website that was for Ibogaine and Ibogaine clinics. I think there was confusion on what's the difference between the two. So what would you say to somebody who's coming to you and they clearly kind of see them as the same thing? I mean, you referenced that there's only 3% of Ibogaine in Iboga, but what even is Ibogaine?
Yeah, so Ibogaine as administered in the clinic is Ibogaine HCl. It is a molecule, you could say. If at the end of the day it's a molecule that's also in Iboga. A simple way to frame it is Ibogaine is like the color red and Iboga is like the entire rainbow. Yeah? Ibogaine is an aspect of what's in Iboga. And that specific aspect has some very interesting research behind it, especially around what it does to the human brain, what it does for the nervous system, and also where a lot of the fear comes in is what it does to the heart. And so what's really happening where these people are getting confused, and what I would tell this person is, yeah, Ibogaine is a single compound and Iboga is a full array of compounds. And it's so much more. Ibogaine is a treatment for substance abuse. Iboga is a treatment for your spirit, for your life, or you could say your soul. Ibogaine is done under medical settings, very rigid medical settings. You're actually hooked up to a heart monitor and a whole thing. It's a very specific set and setting. If you ever read Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, he'll talk so much about the power of set and setting. So Ibogaine's done in a medical facility with heart monitoring and doctors. With Iboga, as you know, we do it here in the jungle, obviously in the eco-luxury property, but there's no heart monitor. Of course, we do EKGs ahead of time. We do a full medical screening ahead of time, just like with the clinics, but we have a completely different approach here. And the reason why it's a lot safer to work with Iboga is because Ibogaine specifically binds to a channel in your heart called the HERG channel. And what happens is potassium moves from the inside of your heart to the outside through this channel. And as potassium moves from the inside to the outside, the polarity changes, and it keeps flipping back and forth as the potassium moves in and out. This flip, or this change, you could say, is measured as something called your QT interval in your heart. A way to think of it is your heart's going boom, 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 boom. That pace is the QT interval. Well, Ibogaine blocks that specific channel, so potassium can no longer flow from the inside to the out or the outside to the in. And instead of having a pattern that's a regular QT, boom, 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 you have an elongated QT. Boom, boom, boom. Now, if that gets too long, that's called cardiac arrest. If that gets too long, your blood pressure can drop and you could have a stroke, right? Your net blood pressure dropping is blood not flowing up to the brain. That's a byproduct of it. That's with Ibogaine. With Iboga, as I said, it's only 3%. So in order to get enough Iboga into your system to affect your heart in such a way, you would have to eat such a tremendous amount of Iboga, it wouldn't even be possible. It's not even possible to do that. And you'd have to extract 100% of the Ibogaine out of the tree bar, which factoring surface area, it's not going to happen. And so Iboga is incredibly safe. Ibogaine is incredibly dangerous. It's a fact. And so what's happening is a lot of people are looking at Ibogaine and drawing an association to Iboga when there really isn't a grounds to do that.
You read my mind. I was trying to send signals out to you, like, tell us why one is safer than the other, Iboga being safer than Ibogaine. So thank you for really being clear on that. Okay, so why would somebody want to do Iboga? Would an addict benefit from Iboga? Who would benefit from Iboga?
The truth is everyone, really. However, Iboga isn't the right first step for a lot of people. If you are someone who's an addict specifically to a substance, my recommendation always is go to an Ibogaine clinic first, have the medical procedure to help get you clean, to help sort of hit you in that sort of way to just stop the addiction, and then come to Iboga to work on the more psychospiritual, psychosomatic aspects of what's actually really causing the addiction in the first place.
Right, like you said, like to stop the physiological addiction in the brain, because addiction is, to a substance is just a symptom of something more. Mm-hmm. What are some of the main addictions that you see?
With Iboga?
Yeah, with the Iboga space.
I mean, I wrote about this in my book recently, but the number one addiction I find is unfortunately an addiction to suffering. And what's really fascinating about that is it manifests in an unlimited array of behavioral patterns or behavioral addictions. You could even call it, to use a technical term, a maladaptive coping strategy, right? There's a lot of ways to frame it, but at the end of the day, what's really happening is people sort of in their own way become addicted to suffering. And a way to translate that is you could say that they become addicted to the stress hormones produced from the states of suffering. And it's a very interesting thing. I worked in this space for a long time now. And when I first came in, I was sort of like everyone. I had the approach of like, hey, this person has trauma. We're here to help them reset the nervous system. It's the most biggest buzzword out yes, ever right now. Nobody even knows what the nervous system is if you ask them. Yeah. I was the same thing when I came in. I thought it was about inner child work and this and IFS and all these little modalities and tricks we bring from the Western world to try to colonize this plant. Mm. And what I found was that Iboga is doing something so much more fundamentally deep in terms of what it does for you, that these modalities and all this stuff is only trying to sort of lasso it back. What I found with Iboga is it's going after the very fact of suffering itself. It doesn't matter how you're suffering, it's going to show you the fact of suffering itself. And what I mean by that specifically, there's a form of teaching called apophatic teaching. Apophatic teachers are, let's say you go to this really wise sage and you say to the teacher, hey, what is enlightenment? The sage isn't going to tell you what enlightenment is. They're going to tell you what it's not. Yeah? And the beautiful part about that is when you see what it's not, you naturally arrive at what it is. But in your own way, in your own sort of approach and time and whatever. Iboga does the same thing. All it's going to do is show you the areas in your life that are causing you to suffer. That's all it does. It shows you it to the point where you can't unsee it. And so when you go home after an Iboga experience, you're going to find that little tiny behaviors that were once your addiction, because it's about a behavioral addiction, have been eradicated. In other words, your addiction to suffering itself has been eradicated. And there's nothing you have to do with a person other than make sure that they feel safe. Make sure that they're held in the ceremonies. And how do you do that really? It starts with the science at the forefront, making sure their left analytical brain has all the questions answered. Now they can come to the retreat with trust and make sure that they understand that this model is happening with reciprocity. It also means by not forcing things on them like specific views of trauma narratives or inner child wounding, also not forcing them narratives of the Bwiti or any other philosophy or school of thought, you could say. It really is just about creating a safe space and allowing them to have their experience with Iboga, and the plant works. It is like a sniper. And then obviously during the retreat, myself, my wife, you, and our staff, we might, poke a little here and there just to get some things rolling. But at the end of the day, Iboga is really just an apophatic teacher.
I was actually thinking during my 2 weeks with Iboga how I used to I'd get frustrated, things like the Tao Te Ching, how it's very simple pieces of wisdom. And I'd be like, I want more. This isn't enough. And it was one day where I took enough Iboga where I just went into a meditative state, and I realized that's putting knowledge above wisdom, because wisdom is felt experience. I have a friend who's very caught up on the whole term unconditional love, because she said, why would you name something that's so special and profound by what it's not? And what you said right there is really profound, because I think that a lot of us, we want to be told exactly what to do and what not to do. And Iboga's just, the wisdom it brings is very simple. It's the feeling, it's the felt experience underneath it that makes it all really profound and real. Can you talk a little bit more about what it does specifically to the mind? You often give the metaphor of the house with bricks and the concrete.
Yeah. And before I answer, I just want to say, you asked me who should come. The people who come to Iboga are really people who are on some sort of self-improvement journey or in some process of spiritual awakening. These are the people we work with. You can come to Iboga for your addictions if you want, but any provider of Iboga who's doing things with ethics in mind for your best interest, they would never take you, because they don't have the equipment there to ensure that if something happens or if you relapse on the site, everything goes fine. And so Iboga really is for people who are spiritual seekers. A lot of our guests are working professionals who have worked with Aya or psilocybin in some way and had really profound changes and big spiritual awakenings. And then they start learning about sort of the gifts of what Iboga does for the mind, which sort of segues into your question. And so I just wanted to say the majority of people who work with us are people who are actually coming in really joyful places. I mean, obviously some people and everyone has their thing, but a lot of them have done a tremendous amount of work on themselves already. Yeah. Some obviously are brand new and they've never done anything, of course, which is fine. But a lot of people come in a really good spot because they understand that Iboga is doing something fundamental to the brain. And that sort of segues to what you're talking about. There's two ways to sort of answer this. I can speak from sort of the science perspective first, because that will appease the left logical brain for everybody listening. So what it does to the brain is a few things. It binds to various receptors across the brain. You're talking about the opioid receptors, right? That's why it works with addiction, the dopamine, the serotonin, 5-HT2A receptors, the same ones psilocybin works in. The glutamate receptors, these are the same ones with ketamine. And then even the acetylcholine receptors for nicotine. That's why it helps with cravings. If you look at our altar, as you see, at our retreats, every time someone leaves a retreat, there's 3 or 4 things of cigarettes left there, or vape.
Or vape pens, yeah.
Yeah, I actually collect vape pens. If I don't get a vape pen after every retreat, there's like a little game I play with myself. Like, I should collect a vape pen. I think I have like 16 right now. Yeah, all stored up.
We need more people. Yeah. We need more surrendering of the vape pens. Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah, which, by the way, on a side note, don't vape and don't smoke cigarettes. If you really want to smoke, you really want to smoke something, go to Peru, I know it sounds like a journey, and get some mopacho. And at least work with something sacred, like a form of tobacco at the very least, and make a ritual out of it in your lives. That will at least bring some sort of harmony and symphony to the smoking process, but just put down the vapes. Those things are terrible for you. And so back to what it does to the brain, it binds to a multitude of receptors. It has proteins in it called GDNF proteins. They're called glial cell line-derived neurotropic factors. These are very interesting things. You can think of them as like the construction workers for your brain. So if, let's say your brain is a building and it's worn down and you want to sort of overhaul it or do a renovation, you would hire a bunch of construction workers who would come to do all the work. The GDNF proteins can be thought of like that. It also does something called increased myelination. Around your neurons is something called myelin. It's a fatty substance. So why you have to eat healthy fats and cholesterols in your diet. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And you have myelination around your neurons. The myelinations insulate the neurons, which allow the neurons to communicate with each other. Like literally allows them to communicate. So without the myelination, no communication happens. This is what happens a lot of times with MS or with Parkinson's. Yeah. And so Iboga will actually help regenerate and reproduce myelination. An interesting fact about myelination is between the little pockets of fat on your neurons are things called nodes of Ranvier. And what happens is when you receive a chemical signal on one side of a neuron, it travels down the body of the neuron as an electric signal. The myelination is there to insulate that electrical signal so it doesn't dissipate and get lost. When you have healthy myelination, your electrical signals actually travel 100 times faster in your body. So just think about that. Your body communicates 100 times faster with healthy myelination. And it makes you wonder sometimes when you see people get older and their reflexes slow down, what's actually happening? You start to see sort of the biomechanical backside of this, right? And so that's another thing it does to the brain for the science perspective. There's a lot more. It increases blood flow to parts of the brain. You'll find it increases gray and white matter. This is all documented in the Stanford study. Dr. Nolan Williams, rest in peace for him. So yeah, I mean, the stuff in the brain, it's endless. I mean, even in the end of his study, he showed that from the start of a study to the end for 30 veterans who were tested, it reduced their predicted brain age by 1.37 years. So in other words, the brain literally got younger, right? That is coming from Iboga only. All that I just named. There's only small amounts of research on the other alkaloids, ibogaine, tabernanthalog, vocongine. There's about 13, 14. The research varies, and I would imagine if you find really old trees, you might find more. But there's all these other alkaloids in Iboga. This is why I said ibogaine is like the color red, Iboga is like the rainbow. And so when you're working with Iboga, you're getting a much more synergistic effect on the brain. And what that does can't be described or really quantified scientifically, at least not yet. That's really when you ask me the question, what does Iboga do for the brain? It's what I would share right now. What Iboga essentially does for the brain is take it back to before your conditioning. Yeah? And so the analogy you brought up earlier of the brick wall. Yeah, you imagine there's a brick wall. Each of those bricks are a belief that you carry about your life. I'll use an example of my own life. When I was a kid living in a foster home, I lived there permanently, and a kid would show up, we'd become best friends, we'd play every day, and then after 2-3 weeks, maybe a month or two, they would disappear and they'd be gone. And I would cry wondering where my friend was. And this would happen over and over and over again. And I remember sitting at a little play school table once, as one of the kids left crying, and I told myself, it's not safe to make relationships with people. I'm just going to get hurt. It's easier for me if I don't do that. That's a belief. So going back to our brick wall analogy, imagine in that moment, I put a brick in my structure that said relationships aren't safe. And that sort of informs your life going forward. Yeah? So if the question is, if that's just a brick or a belief in your structure, then what do you call the concrete holding it all together? Which you know the answer because we've been around the fire circle for years now, which is?
Faith.
Your faith. Your faith is the concrete that holds the structure all together. So it's not a matter of your belief. It's a matter of the faith that's invested in that belief. This is why religions take advantage of people's faith specifically. They don't take advantage of your beliefs. Yeah? And so what Iboga does is it removes the concrete from the structure, especially the foundational areas of the structure. And I'll give a very clear example. Anyone listening on this call who drives a car, or this podcast, excuse me, when the first time you got behind the car, I guarantee you were like, oh shoot. You were looking at the mirrors, you're looking at the brake, the gas, maybe you also had a clutch. There was lights, there was all these things, air conditioning, other cars on the road. It was chaos, I would imagine. And now, when you drive all these years later, what is it like? You tell me, right?
Yeah, it's second nature. Your mind can go elsewhere while you drive. I mean, some people are so good at it, they text and they eat and they do other things while driving. Maybe they shouldn't, but that's what we do.
Basi, right? And so the question is, why is that? Right? It's not just magic. I mean, it is magical, but there's a mechanism we call functional neurology, which explains that. And what's actually happening is a very complex process that originally takes a lot of computing power, which requires all of your attention, gets compartmentalized down to a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia is where we start to automate these repetitive tasks like driving a car. All that's really happening in people, the reason they're addicted to suffering, is because these beliefs from their childhood have formed into very complex brick structures, programming that has been compartmentalized down into the basal ganglia, just like driving a car. And what we're doing with Iboga, to stick with our analogy, is like unlearning how to drive. But instead of unlearning how to drive, it's unlearning how to create our own suffering.
Before we move forward, you mentioned a few Western diagnoses that Iboga can help with. You mentioned Parkinson's. I can't remember but can you just quickly touch on, from a therapeutic stance in that way, what Iboga in a micro or macro dose can help in terms of Western diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Western diagnosis is we're just describing a collection of symptoms, right? So as I said, I'm in my doctorate in clinical psychology, so I know all this jargon. When you say someone says, I had PTSD, they're not saying they have something called PTSD. They're saying that I have a collection of symptoms that together describe what we call PTSD. This is why a lot of people, when they self-diagnose themselves and you ask them to tell me your symptoms, their symptoms don't fully align as a DSM-5 criteria. And so also a lot of the backlash on diagnoses is honestly unnecessary, because people don't understand that when someone's diagnosing you, they're not diagnosing you, they're naming the set of symptoms that you're expressing.
For insurance purposes.
But still, it's also very helpful, because now if someone comes into the office and you say you have major depressive disorder, I know exactly the symptoms that are manifesting in your life. That's the benefit of it. It's instant information. It has meaning associated to it. So just try not to be stuck on the label. Try to go down to the level of the behaviors, you could say. And so what type of stuff does it trait? Anything. Anything that's a behavioral addiction of sorts it can trait. It helps with depression. This has been proved over and over again. It helps with anxiety. How it helps with depression, anxiety is usually a pretty theatrical thing that happens inside the Iboga space, inside the realm. I had one woman come who was terrified of death. She was actually suicidal. And in her ceremony, the plant, and that drove a lot of anxiety and depression in her life, because she would say to herself, like, I just can't believe I don't want to live. I never thought I'd be that type of person. So there's also a cognitive element that comes to that, right? This whole cluster. And what the Iboga did for her specifically was it had her laying in her bed here in the temple, drop into the earth about 12 feet under, as if she was about to be buried, and people started throwing dirt on her at a funeral. And as it covered up her vision, she could no longer see the light. She teleported into being above, almost like she's a spirit watching down at her funeral. And the first thing she did when that happened was she said, no, I don't want to die. And for her, this was that real moment where she got to see, oh my gosh, I really don't want to die. So that whole suicide thing was something else that I was doing. The truth is, I don't want to die. It actually gave her what could be considered like a near-death experience to teach her that she really does want to live. Not by telling her she wants to live, but by showing her that she doesn't want to die. Again, apophatic teaching. And so it helps people in a variety of ways with all sorts of conditions, because these conditions are traced down to beliefs that you carry that are harming your life right now. That's why we use that brick wall analogy.
It brings me back to the whole concept of wisdom. You know, in the classic therapy, especially like a colonized type of therapy situation, it's just you're being thrown with diagnosis and knowledge, whereas with Iboga it's that You're shown things through your own psyche that you can't argue with. And some people will argue with, and it's a tough time for them to argue with that, with the truth. But I feel like that's why it's so effective. I have a loved one who is struggling with addiction, and he's being told what he should and shouldn't do. Whereas I know with Iboga, he's going to tell himself. Which kind of segues me into, I remember one time I said to you that I was at my altar and I was thinking Iboga. And you just reminded me, as you remind a lot of people, use the analogy of when you eat a banana, what does it become? Or do you become a banana? So can you touch a little bit on like the concept of Ibogas? And people do this with ayahuasca. People see it as like an entity or like, God forbid, a deity. Can you talk a little bit about what happens when you consume Iboga from a spiritual point of view?
Yeah. So, I mean, the analogy you gave about the banana is exactly right. And so just think about that. You eat this tree bark, you ingest it, and it becomes you. Where's the Iboga? How do you delineate the two? And so what you have to remember is that the nature of these plant spirits is they merge with us. They merge into us. We're the more complex organism, right? There's the mineral kingdom, there's the plant kingdom, there's an animal kingdom, there's a kingdom of man, and there's yet further more complex organisms beyond in the etheric realm. And so all Iboga is doing is it's joining us in our lives and highlighting these parts specifically from our subconscious mind, our limbic brain, where the basal ganglia is, right? Highlighting these parts and showing us the parts of in there that are causing us suffering. And the byproduct of that, to answer your question, is spirituality naturally returning. A way to think of it is, imagine this, your mind and the suffering it's learned over these years is creating a dam in the river. That river is the pure flow of spirit in your life. But your mind creates these stories, these things, and they compartmentalize and chop it down, and you have this big block in the river. Spirit's always flowing through us, but the current is restricted by the mind. All Iboga's doing is taking out the river. And naturally, the byproduct of that is something that was always there, just continues to flow more. So from a spiritual perspective, it's actually not even doing anything, except for taking away the stories that are actually causing the block. And so we're remembering or coming back to our wholeness.
I see. So the way that you work in the with Root and Wisdom, which is the name of your retreat company, is very specific with Iboga. And in the facilitator training, which plug over here, they have a Troy and Joalie, his wife, they've created a really awesome facilitator training if anyone's interested in getting into that. But something that you said was, as facilitators, we're the hands and feet of Iboga. So the way that you have set up each retreat is really, really specific. So can you touch more on the environment that you create? You have touched a little bit, but yeah, to get into more specifics on somebody who comes to you, they want to do Iboga, they go through a very specific process with you before they even arrive to the retreat center. But also if you could walk us through specifically, even down to the food, you guys are really honed in. So before, during, and after, how you work with clients and guests.
Yeah. Before the retreat, it's really about connection and trust. That's really where it starts. And you do that by really articulating to people and helping them see the safety piece, right? We've adopted all the standards from an Iboga clinic. The only difference is we don't take people who are in active addiction, right? And so, first of all, we create an incredibly safe system. We have doctors on our medical board. We have an ethics committee. I mean, we run it like it's a medical center in terms of making sure that, I'm not just the person who makes the decisions. If there is an ethical thing that happens, which we've never had one, I don't plan we will. But if there was one, it wouldn't even be in my hands. It would go directly to an ethics committee, right? And so it starts off by creating a foundation of that the person approaches with integration built into it, preparation and post, of course. Preparation comes in two modes. You work with myself, and then you work with my wife more on the sort of psychosomatic, mine sort of more psycho-spiritual elements of the work, helping you get ready to come in with mindset, how to navigate things in the space. And Joe's more so about the somatic experiencing portion, helping you really understand and fall back into the body. Because as much as Iboga is about the mind, and I talk about it, it's an incredibly somatic plant. And the reason is because the brain and the nervous system are not separate. They're the same thing. The nervous system is an extension of the brain. The brain, you could also say, is an extension of the nervous system. According to my teacher, our nervous system starts in our feet. That's where it first develops, and it grows upward into a brain. And so, you have to just understand that it's really about safety and connection first coming in. Once you get to the retreat, it is an immersive program with layers and layers of depth and meaning and ceremony and ritual. We try to blend both Western sort of therapeutic modalities that people are used to hearing for vocabulary and nomenclature with sort of indigenous rituals. Some come from Joe's Dominican side, the Taino portion of her, and some are elements we've learned in Gabon but have adapted to our own ways. There's tons of ways we sort of merge different lineages we've walked with. We've never wanted to sort of try to emulate the Bwiti at all, actually, for a lot of reasons. And we've also just always felt like it's more authentic if we do things sort of in a more holistic manner. So you'll start the retreat basically with food that will nurture the process of Iboga. What that means is you want to have healthy fats, nice cholesterols. We have salmon on the menu. We combine the foods on the menu specifically to work around alkalinity in your stomach. That doesn't mean we're serving you an alkaline diet. What it means is that we try to keep the food combinations together where things that actually digest well together are being consumed. The reason is because it takes less energy to digest. An example in the American diet is we eat meat and potatoes, which is really protein and starch. The issue with that is protein requires one specific pH to break down your stomach, and starch requires one specific pH to break down your stomach. Well, they're both in there at the same time. So what do? You create a middle place. It does some digestion, and a lot of it is undigested. So we're not really maximizing even the amount of food we intake. And so what we try to do is tailor the menu, of course, to keys like that. And also from the sort of biomechanical side, what nutrients does your body need in order to feel sustained during this sort of process. We've also incorporated in somatic bodywork sessions with Zaida, as you know. We have a 4-session package we ask everyone to get, if they can, of course. It's 4 massages on 4 specific days of the retreat. There's specific modalities that we've dialed in. The last one is actually a reflexology to stimulate more GDNF production. We have equine therapy into the model. We use a clay workshop, which is really beautiful. It's one of my favorite ones now. Clay workshop, which you haven't seen because we started this with Sedona recently. What you do with the clay workshop is we give everyone, I'll tell you one of the things we'll do because I don't want to spoil it. We give everyone a card, playing card. It's either red or black. Nobody knows what the other person has. And then we give you a piece of clay. If you have a black card, you are supposed to make an emotion that you feel most often that's negative, or you would call negative, yeah? Or the ones you don't want, whatever you want to call it. If you have a red card, you do an emotion that you feel most often that's quote unquote positive, that you do want around. And we just make it with clay. And what we do is we put it down on the table and we ask everyone to vote and see which one's positive, which one's negative. And unanimously, every single time, you're going to be able to tell the negative ones, quote unquote negative, from the positive ones. And the way we use this to warm up for our actual clay exercise is because you start to see that our bodies and all this somatic stuff we're doing is like the clay. Our mind is the one shaping the clay. So you can do all the somatic work you want. It's amazing, it's complementary, and it's necessary. But unless you're addressing the thing that's shaping the clay, often into these very obtuse shapes that aren't harmonious, that aren't symmetrical, which you'll see when you do this exercise, that's your body. And so we use this to teach people and educate you about the body as something that's being informed by the mind. Yeah, it's a really beautiful practice. And when you go around, you're going to be able to tell all the negative shapes and all the positive ones, and all the positive shapes will be nice and symmetrical. There'll be hearts and suns and all this lovely stuff. And when you see the negative shapes, they're going to be like spiked and rigid and off balance. It's very interesting, yeah? And so we also have rituals like we'll take you up to the river and do a spiritual shower. This is right in between the 2 Iboga ceremonies. And it just so happens to be, obviously this is all part of how we planned it, to be exactly when your synaptic pruning is at its highest, according to the literature. So when you ingest Iboga or Ibogaine, not only do you grow new neurons, it's neuroplasticity, you go through a process of called synaptic pruning. And in this process of synaptic pruning, you're simply trimming away the hedges of the old neuronal connections that are no longer serving you. going back to the talk I was giving about our addiction to suffering, these behaviors we learned that become compartmentalized down into the basal ganglia. Imagine being able to go in and cut those out. You can still leave the part of it that learned to drive. Don't cut that out. But you cut out the part of you that learned to suffer and got addicted to it, right? That happens exactly, it peaks exactly when we're doing the spiritual shower. The point of the spiritual shower is to help a snake shed its skin, is another way to frame it. We've had these old stories, these old conditions, this thing we came into this retreat. You have a workbook you fill out before you come in, and you're going to put all this stuff about your past on it. All your trauma, all the abuse, all those things that have shaped you into who you are right now. We're going to see that in your medical form. We're going to see it in your pre-retreat workbook. And what we're doing at the spiritual shower is we're drawing a line in the sand and calling that the past. And we're stepping into a new future. It doesn't mean you won't continue maybe to work on some things in your future, of course. But what you're going to find when you have, in this very interesting way, permission to let go of the past through a ritual, you let go of the past. It's a very sort of seamless process. So that's the first half of the retreat, going to the spiritual shower. The second half is all about stepping into a new life. And so we have new modalities that are more teaching, more forward-looking. And so the retreat is a living organism itself that once you exit, you'll also be collecting research that I'm using for my dissertation. And once you exit, you'll be greeted with an integration program, monthly integration calls that are free for everybody, and then monthly community calls where I go over a topic concerned with Iboga. Like this week, I'm probably going to do, I think, the entropy hypothesis of psychedelics and Iboga. Right? The week after that, I'm going to do the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and Iboga. We've done them on Parkinson's, Iboga in the brain, microdosing, macrodosing, the whole thing, as you know. And that's sort of our container as a whole.
Yeah. And it's, I guess, to compliment you guys, I feel really honored to be a part of the team because I haven't done a ton of plant medicine, but I've done several retreats and everyone's always asked me, like, what do you recommend for an ayahuasca retreat or a bufo? And really there's nobody I would recommend because now that I've worked with you guys on both sides as a facilitator and a guest, the standard, but also the support that you guys provide is really unique. Not a lot of places are doing that. And it's what the work that you're doing is to really ensure that there's not only a change, you're not concerned with blasting people and, impressing them with what Iboga can do. It's all about this sustainable change and not just a connection with yourself, but a connection to the truth within, but also the truth that's outside of you too. It just lasts. It's a chronic change versus an acute mind blow moment. Let's talk a little bit about the quote unquote dark side of Iboga. First, we had a conversation the other day. I had a loved one express concern asking if it's possible for me to get addicted to Iboga. And yeah, I'll just say my answer. I was just like, I don't know, but all I know is that I feel the most myself when I work with it. So when I'm no longer kind of under the influence of Iboga, I'm like, oh, thank God, I'm so great. It's wonderful. But, you express to me, well, hey, there is an aspect to that could become problematic. So yeah, my question is, can somebody get addicted to Iboga?
To answer this, me in my typical fashion, I have to tell a little bit of a story. Yeah, if that's okay.
Of course.
And it'll answer it along the way.
I prefer a story.
This is from the Carlos Castaneda books. I think this one is from the first or second book, I'm not sure. But in the books, Carlos Castaneda, who's the apprentice, is studying with this Yaqui elder, you call him a shaman if you like, Don Juan. Yeah? And throughout the series, Don Juan keeps mentioning what it means to become a man of knowledge. Yeah? And Castaneda keeps asking him, what is it? He never tells him for some reason. So finally, in one of the books, he gets into it and he says, okay, I'm going to tell you how to become a man of knowledge. And this could be a woman of knowledge or a person of knowledge, right? It's just what the book says. And he says, in order to become a man of knowledge, you have to defeat the 4 enemies. Yeah? And so he's like, okay, well, what are the 4 enemies, Don Juan? And Don Juan says, all right, the first enemy is the one that gets the majority of people. And it's fear. And he says, what happens is in your life, in your journey, you're going to run into something that's going to produce fear. And for the majority of people, that's going to stop you. For example, when I decided to leave everything and come to Costa Rica, a fear popped up.
Same.
I'm working at a job that's making almost $250,000 a year. I have a beautiful person I'm in love with. I have a condo in downtown San Diego. I found my peace inside. what am I doing? Right? If that fear stops me, we don't have this conversation, this retreat doesn't exist. Think about all the people we've seen, the hundreds of people a year we serve that you've seen now come through here that would not have had that. They would have been somewhere else for sure, but they wouldn't have had this. So what happens with fear is it stops you from progressing along your spiritual journey, from walking the path your heart wants you to take. Yeah, so that's the first enemy to becoming a man of knowledge. And he says, well, how do you get past your fear? And he says, well, most people try to go past their fears or conquer their fears. No, you don't do that. You become it. You become one with it. A perfect example is Batman. Batman, Bruce Wayne, he was afraid of bats. And so instead of doing something else around it or trying to get rid of the bats or calling a Terminator or, whatever those called for animals, he became it. And so what you have to do is you have to become whatever your biggest fear is. You have to merge with it, one. And in that union, there's no more observer you and observe the fear. There's only one. So there's no more it. That's the only way to get past fear, truly. Otherwise, you're dancing around it. It's always creeping on you. Now you get past fear, and he says the next enemy comes because you start to conquer the world. You're like, yes, my fears aren't stopping me. And you start to get clarity. Now you can see clearly now. You start to get more knowledge and wisdom on things. And this is where you meet the second enemy, clarity. And the issue with clarity is you think you know. You think you know everything. And in that knowing, you've stopped yourself from the real gift of learning, of education, and of growth. Yeah? That's why Socrates said, as for me, all I know is I know nothing. He was talking about something very, very profound. That's why Vedanta translates to the end of knowledge. Don Miguel Ruiz, the author of the Four Agreements, wrote a book called The Voice of Knowledge. And it's all about stopping this thing of clarity, essentially. My book, Living Beyond the Mind, is really about how to combat this enemy, clarity. And so the only way to get past clarity is to realize that you really don't know. You really don't know anything. You might think you do, but you don't. You ever sat with someone who just went to a therapist appointment and they tell you this whole story about why they're messed up? It's because my childhood was this and this and this and this, and my inner child got lost, and now I'm using these attachment behavior styles and da-da-da-da-da. It's a story. Yeah? So how do you get past clarity? You realize that you really don't know. I don't know. And in that not knowing, something happens where you're able to learn something new because you realize you don't know. Once you know, the learning stops. When you don't know, you're forever a student, never a master. So you start going forward. And he says this is when you run into the third enemy, which is one of the most dangerous, especially for men. Because now that you conquered your fears, now that you don't let clarity stop you, now you start to accumulate power. Yeah, you start to have power. You start to have influence over the other. People start looking up to you. There's this dynamic that starts to happen in your life. And that becomes sticky and clingy, especially with men. Look around the world. Leadership roles, men in power, they abuse it. And so he's like, well, how do I get past power? And he says, you have to realize that it's not yours. It's something that's moving through you. This is where we come to Iboga. Because when you start moving with Iboga, you're moving past fears. It's really helping you with the clarity, realizing you don't know, right? By teaching you what not to do, or what's causing you suffering. And now you start to accumulate this power for yourself. You can call it a spiritual ego, you could say. That is the addiction with Iboga. And just to complete the story, the last of the four enemies, after he says, how do you get past power, realizing it's not yours, it's something that moves through you. If you ever want to know how this is modeled, look at Marcus Aurelius, his life story, just check that out. The last one that comes for you is old age. And Don Juan's like, or Castaneda is like, how am I supposed to get past old age? And Don Juan says, well, you're not going to like this, but you have to beat fear, clarity, and power over and over and over and over again to the very end of your life. When you take your last breath, if you've done that over and over again, you will have become a man of knowledge in that breath. And so it's sort of a teaching that it's about the journey, not the destination. But to answer your question again, that's how people get addicted to Iboga. They get addicted to the power. And the deepest issue with that is that the neuroplasticity is objective. It does not care what you do with it. The G and F proteins are going to be produced. The synaptic pruning is going to happen on its own way. And what you choose to do with it is entirely up to you. And so if you take that Iboga and you're serving it and working with it and eating it and consuming it, and you're BSing in the background of your life, you're reinforcing that. You're sewing yourself into a spider's web expecting to get out. And so that's what I've seen in the space, and that's the biggest risk of the addiction to Iboga, is that it works, except you use it against yourself. This is why our program is called an integrative living program. It's not an integration program. It's not about how you integrate with Iboga. It's not about that. That's maybe for Aya or psilocybin or MDMA, sure, but we're not talking about a psychedelic. We're talking about an ally, something that's going to live in your life with you going forward. Ibogaine, you have to integrate afterwards. Iboga is not about integration. It's about integrative living. You have to change the way you move through this world. This is why we have people come on in our community, give workshops on altar building. This is why we talk about energetic cleansing at the retreat. We're inviting people to live in these more connected ways, the ways these indigenous communities live, the way the Bwiti live. Yeah, the Bwiti is the study of life. We're inviting you to take a whole new approach to living that isn't five sensory, concerned with survival and material things where you're dwelling in your trauma every day. We're inviting you to step back into spirit, start connecting with your own body, seeing your body as a temple, seeing your home as a temple. How do you do that? That's how you use the neuroplasticity with Iboga, and that's really what our program is about.
I'm going to say the classic quote, with great power comes great responsibility. Because, I mean, when I did my 2 weeks of turning my Wi-Fi off and just being with Iboga and eating it every day, I did have a few moments of like, fuck. Like, this is a really powerful plant. And if I'm like fucking around and not really being honest with myself, because I had this realization of how often I lied to myself. It's like, if I continue this, then I'm lost, especially with how much Iboga I'm going to be eating. You know, I just have this resonance with working with it. But yeah, if I'm going to continue eating it and lie to myself, especially knowingly, because there's a lie that we do that's out of ignorance, but knowingly lying to myself, that's where you're lost.
Bossy.
Yeah.
That's the most dangerous possible thing you can do with Iboga, is tell yourself a lie. It's a hunter of the truth. And so if you start lying, you're going to ingrain your brain into something that lies on itself, and you're toasted. And I've watched it happen to a lot of people.
Let's close off with what I mentioned in the beginning. What do you say to somebody who listens to this podcast, has eaten Iboga, maybe a lot, maybe a little bit, has worked in the ceremony space, and they tell you that they feel called to work with Iboga? What would you say to them?
I would say to them, it's your life, and that just be very careful, because, you know, the spiritual ego is a tricky thing. And, you know, there's people who say they feel called to serve Aya, they feel called to serve Iboga, they feel called to serve 5-MeO. And I would just check in with myself and see if that's something that's really coming from your heart, or if it's something that you're choosing under the mask of spirituality or calling. And I don't mean to be disrespectful or push people away from following their truth. We have a facilitator training program and a provider training program for people who really want to do the Iboga thing and want to serve it to others. You know, for us, we did it out of a response for harm reduction, right? Because we recognize that whether or not people's call is authentic or not, who am I to judge that? Who is anyone? Only you know. And because of that, we said our responsibility in the space is to create a program that teaches people how to do it right, in terms of safety, in terms of harm reduction, in terms of ethics, how to build reciprocity into their models, how to get it from sustainable means. I mean, all the things that come into it from the ceremony aspects. So what I would say to that person is just please understand that if you're going to be serving this plant, it means you're going to be ingesting it a lot. And if you started this journey with a lie about how you were called to it, that's going to be the foundation of everything you stack on top of your neuroplasticity. In Iboga, there's a saying, you lie, you die. And it's not direct, but it's a long grave. Remember, with the end of that story with Don Juan, is the last one is old age. You have to keep beating these things over and over and over again. If you start off a journey with a foundation that's a lie, saying that you feel called when it really is more of your ego base, or you want to feel seen, or you want to help out of some sort of lack that you're not helping already, you're going to find problems for yourself in this space. I promise you, this space does not, it kicks people out. I've seen it, and you have to live in integrity and alignment. Joe and I understand this so much that we don't even take pay from Iboga, and financially we've had such a hard journey the first 3.5 years of doing this. Now we're making money from my book sales and some other things like coaching packages we have and stuff like that. But the first 3 years we literally were running retreats and never taking $1, and we still don't. Because we know that if our work with this plant becomes transactional, we know that the neuroplasticity is going to sow in a seed of transaction, and we just don't want that. So this is our way of protecting ourselves. So if you are called and it's something that's resonating from your heart, just know that there's good resources on how to get trained out there. We offer one. But just please, please, please check in with yourself. Really check in. Be honest. And ask yourself if you're doing this from a place of ego, a place of lack, or a need, or a want, or something that it's a desire, which is the source of suffering, an aspect of it, according to the Buddha. Or is it something your heart's calling? I can tell you, I never wanted to be an Iboga provider. I never said, oh, I want to do that. I never did anything from that. When I saw myself in Gabon and I came home and I took a genetics test and found out that my lineage was from there, something in my life is clear as day. It wasn't a calling. There's no other choice. It was, you're going here. Even the guy who served it said he already had a picture of me. He drew of me years ago saying that someone was going to come along and take over his role. And that's how I actually started. I apprenticed under a guy, and he handed over the retreat to me. That's how I got started serving it. And so it's not even like something I just decided to go do. And if you look around the people who are doing it in really deep, foundational ways, it's not really a calling either. It's more of a responsibility and a duty, than anything else. And so that's what I would say. And it's not, again, not to discourage anyone. I'm just telling you, you could cause a lot more problems and cause a lot of harm for people. And again, if it is, we have a training program that will help you with everything you need.
And a lot of harm for yourself. I mean, seeing the people the ways they've been kicked out, it's literally life and death. And as somebody who's brand new to the space, just from the level of facilitator, it's really confronting. Like, it's not easy to be somebody consistently. I mean, it's a beautiful life, and I don't want it to be any other way, but it's not easy at all. It's been being around people who are consuming Iboga. You're seen in a way that you're not seen by others. It's just, you can't hide from them, and you can't hide from yourself. And you'll continue to try, and it takes an exceptional amount of willpower and brainwashing to lie to yourself. So yeah, it's just for anyone who's curious in facilitation, it's beautiful work, and it's really fucking tough.
Yeah, and I just want to say, if you are interested in learning more about facilitating these type of spaces, which means like being a support staff, our facilitating training program is literally incredible. I mean, it's 9 modules that cover everything from actual what it means to be trauma informed from a clinical sense, down to the overlap of clinical hypnosis and working with people in the psychospiritual aspect of the space. I mean, it goes into decolonizing our minds. I mean, there's a lot. You're moving through it. And so, yeah, just for anyone who's interested, we also have a facilitator training program, which is for people who just want to get experience in this type of space, a mix between sort of Western therapeutic and sort of indigenous ways, you could say.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just know that we have that program available for those people too.
Yeah. Yeah. What I like is there's a lot of self-inquiry to, again, just to keep yourself in check. Troy, is there anything else that feels worth mentioning about Iboga to share with the general public here?
Yeah. Again, just remember, even if Ibogaine doesn't come from Iboga anymore, whether they're getting it from Vokanga or making it through some other sort of synthetic process, the point still stands that its discovery is credited to Iboga, the discovery of Ibogaine, you could say, and that we always have to keep in mind the indigenous people who are the entrusted bearers of this plant. We have to. And without that, I wonder sometimes, in the West, we consume Iboga for ourselves. Right? I come to this retreat because I need healing, or I need blank, I need this, I need that. And in Gabon, Iboga is consumed for the community. It brings people together. And so just please remember that when you're dealing with Ibogaine, you're dealing with a medical treatment. You're dealing with something that is beautiful and amazing in what it does and it has efficacy and all those things you want, amazing. But when you deal with Iboga, you're dealing with a tradition, a lineage, a land, a country. You're dealing with people whose lives are lived in ceremony, caring for this plant. And so just understand that it's something deeply, deeply profound to sit with Iboga that is an honor. And that honor requires reciprocity to be balanced. Yeah. And just remember, so when you come, please know that it doesn't mean you give back money to indigenous communities. It just means you do something for the land. You can give reciprocity to land. You know, we have a land offering. We ask all of our guests to bring some sort of land offering, even if it's your breath. It could be a little totem, a little stone, whatever. But just how do you give reciprocity to the land when you come back? How do you give reciprocity to the plant when you're holding it? Maybe you do donate to Africa. I don't know. But the point I'm getting at is without reciprocity, you can't have respect. Yeah. And that's what's necessary in the Iboga space. With the medical clinic, you could show up, not care, get your treatment and go home. But Iboga is an ally. It's going to stay with you in life. And that requires your reciprocity.
And can you please share how people can find you, which will all be put in the show notes?
Yeah, you could come to our website, Root and Wisdom. If you click on submit an inquiry or book a call, you'll talk with me directly. I speak with every single person who comes to our retreat just to make sure we're the right fit and, you know, just make sure I'm screening people right. So that's one avenue. Another avenue is you can come to our website, Authentic Empowerment. My wife and I are remodeling right now. It was my coaching platform. Now it's our coaching platform. It's funny how that happens when you get married. Everything sort of becomes this our thing, even your coaching site, apparently. And so you can come there and set up a call with us and chat if you need integration support. We have different sort of packages we do. You can also move through one of our programs. I run something, it's called the Living Beyond the Mind program. It's based off my book. It's basically an 8-week program. You'll do it with Joe and I. And then at the end, the invitation is to come directly into an Iboga retreat with us. It's a really incredible way to come to Iboga. And in my humble opinion, I don't know if there's a better way to prepare for Iboga than our program. And so those are some of the doors in. You could also just always email us at info@rootandwisdom.com. And yeah, that would be the best ways.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing Iboga with me and all the people that you've helped. And thanks for inviting me to Costa Rica.
Fasi, man. We love having you here.
All right, you made it to the end of this episode. Congratulations. If you enjoyed it, you can show your support by leaving a rating, review, and most importantly, sharing this with somebody who would benefit from this conversation.